Welcome to the neighborhood, Hapi Hood The Podcast, where we deliver meaningful content to grow your faith, well being, and leadership skills. Hey, neighbor, I'm your favorite neighbor, Jay Murray, lifestyle coach, inspiring others to develop self worth through leadership applications that will enable them to live in purpose. Hapi Hood The Podcast.
Finish
Message.
what you started.
Happy Nation, welcome back to the neighborhood. Welcome to another edition of Hapi Hood The Podcast. I'm your favorite neighbor, Jay Murray, and today's guest is on a mission to eliminate burnout, one organization, one person at a time. She is a physician, leadership coach, and well-being consultant. Please welcome to the neighborhood, Dr. Hiba Khaled. How you doing?
Good. Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm doing
No
well. How are
problem.
you?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm doing fantastic for a Tuesday. It seems like this week is flying by. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay.
You
Yeah,
doing
me.
okay? Well, that's good. That's good to hear. Today we are talking about a topic that again, for all my individuals that's familiar with the podcast, a topic that we explore many times, and that's burnout. I have talked about my own experience of burnout of last year, of going through moments of, you know, where once I took a moment to kind of collect my thoughts and just kind of, take a moment to kind of take inventory, I started to understand, oh, I was going through some stress. I was going through some burnout and really, stretching myself really thin. So we have definitely discussed burnout, and I'm so really excited to have someone with your caliber, Dr. Hibbert, that can provide some additional context around burnout. So I guess kind of starting with a, how would you define burnout?
Mm. So, burnout is defined by the WHO. So, the World Health Organization has come up with an occupational, what they call an occupational phenomenon for burnout. And
Mm-hmm.
they define it as a result of chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. And so they define it technically by three dimensions. So feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased
Mm-hmm.
mental distance from one's job, and then feelings of cynicism, which actually turns out to be one of the most telltale signs of burnout for
Mm.
most people. And then the last thing is reduced professional efficacy. So that's the official actual like definition of burnout according to the WHO, because now it's been identified as an occupational phenomena that occurs for a lot of people in their workplaces. Um, but I believe that from my experience, I know that burnout might start at work or can
Yeah.
be a result of stress at work, and it can also bleed into other aspects of our lives, like our relationships, our families, our finances, and our mental well-being as well. So um, yeah, I think it's like a little bit more fluid than the
Yeah.
clinical definition that they give.
Yeah, just kind of to your point, it's more fluid than just narrowing it down to my occupation, in
Yeah,
which,
I think so. From the experience that I've had personally, and the experience
mhm,
that I have with clients, it's definitely way more fluid than just like it's a work thing.
yeah, yeah, totally, totally. Would you say that is, one thing you mentioned around just the definition, right? Um, is like this inability to manage,
Mm,
inability to manage your stress. Like when you think about that from a burnout perspective, one, like what causes that? Like
mm.
what is our inability? Like what does that look like?
Yeah, that's such a good question because again, I don't fully agree with this definition or
Yeah.
inability to manage stress, because I think it's twofold, right? Like, I think part of it is definitely as human beings, we have autonomy and control over our reaction to stress.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that has an impact on how well we manage or don't manage stress.
Yeah.
And that can speak to the individual factors that can cause burnout, and I can go through them in a second. But then the other
Mm-hmm.
thing that this definition eliminates or kind of doesn't address is the fact that often it's not just an individual problem; it's an organizational problem. So
Mm.
it's like it's both. It's not either or; it's both. So it's like because two people can work in the same company and have different, like one can burn out and doesn't burn out. So
Mm-hmm.
in that under the same circumstances, so in that case, you can look at the individual factors of like what's making person A burn out and person B like survive or thrive. And
Mm-hmm.
then you can look at the individual factors. But then there might be systemic factors, or there often are systemic factors that
Mm-hmm.
also contribute to burnout. So I think it would be amiss if we don't actually look at the whole picture of burnout, right? So, like
Yeah.
the most common um, individual factors are actually our belief system,
Mm.
and what are the voices in our heads that dictate like our work ethic. For example, um, there's there's a lot of people who have beliefs um, I like I have to get the job done no matter what,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And that's a very common belief for a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people. Under like, it doesn't matter what the circumstances are. It doesn't matter how hard I have to work. I have to finish this thing.
Yeah.
And so that can override our internal signals that tell us that you're tired, you need sleep, you need to eat, you need to
Mm-hmm.
take a break and go out for a walk, because we
Yeah.
can override that consciously by thinking like no matter what need to get this done. There my other belief systems could be like, I'm exhausted, but I sorry, can you hear the dogs barking?
Yeah. It's totally okay. It's
I live
totally
in
okay.
Brooklyn, so like you're gonna get some New York City, Brooklyn
It's
sound.
cool.
I
I
can't
love
control what's happening out there. um but so other thoughts are like I want to work just as hard as everyone else. So if I don't want to appear like the weakest link in the
it.
organization, or um, if I don't do this, or if I'm so tired but I'm not able to cope anymore, then maybe I'm not that resilient, and that will like put me at risk of losing my job.
Mhm.
So there's like just depends on whatever the belief system is, and that usually comes from our upbringing,
Yeah,
whether it's like
yeah.
from our professional circles. Like I was a
Mhm,
doctor before, and there's definitely like some voices in my head that I can hear as a doctor. Like in my residency, is like I used to come on to like night shift, and you have fewer staff on nights,
mhm.
and more responsibility in a lot of ways, because it's usually just emergencies that happen, and kind of making sure everyone's safe during the night and getting them through the night into the day.
Sure.
And one of the lines that like more senior doctors than me used to tell me was like, feel free to cope.
Mm.
That I'd come onto night shift and it'd be like, feel free to cope. So like, what does that, how do I translate that in my own head? you
Yeah,
know how do
yeah.
I translate that depending on who I am? But for me, it was like, only ask for help if you really need it. Like only if you're struggling, like you really need to ask for help, but feel free to like manage on your own. And so like really over time I internalized that voice to the point where like when I was struggling with burnout, because I did have coping mechanisms that worked up to a certain point, but when I exhausted those coping mechanisms and they were no longer enough or no longer working, I felt scared to ask for help, because I'm like, I'm not coping. And if I'm not feeling free to cope, what does that mean? Am I an imposter? Should I not be a doctor anymore?
Mm,
And so it was like a threat to my sense of identity as a doctor, and also a threat to my sense of belonging to this community of healthcare workers that were all feeling free to cope.
mhm.
And it was only when I left the profession that I realized, like, I was able to zoom out enough to realize, like, oh, it wasn't everyone else was stressed around me. Like,
Yeah.
we're all just highly functional, stressed out people, like working in this
Highly
environment,
functional, stressed out people. Yes.
and like I didn't have a lot of capacity or reserve at the
Mm-hmm.
time. Neither did everyone else. And what does that mean about the whole system in general? Like we
Yeah.
are the system. The group of healthcare workers working in that system are the system.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if each of us individually have a lot little reserve, like we we're again like we are highly functional and we're delivering good patient care, but how much better could it be if we had a bit more reserve?
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, that's like part of the kind of belief system. And then other
Mm-hmm.
things are like feeling undervalued is a big one at an individual level, like that causes burnout. So if we are working, and we're not being recognized for our work, as human beings, we want to feel validated and recognized for the efforts that we're putting in. We want to feel like we're
Mm-hmm.
making an impact and that our work matters. So if we're not being recognized for our work, then that can also cause burnout and kind of like resentment.
Yeah.
And then the other really, really big one for both the organizational level and the individual level is misalignment with the vision and mission of the organization in which you're
Come on.
working. So if I'm not aligned with the organization that I'm working with, and I have been in that position in the past, and I know what that feels like in my body, you know, like I know what it felt like because you're just like I'm showing up to work. I'm waking up in the morning, dreading starting my day.
Yeah.
I I'm just doing this to get a paycheck at the end of the month. I I it's like that sense of security and safety from a paycheck, from health insurance, from having a job that is going to pay me at the end of each month was enough to keep me in that job long enough for me to like really build up the resentment and the
Mm-hmm.
like because the fear of the insecurity was so strong that it like overrode for a while at least
Yeah.
this need to be aligned with the organization until that until the balance tipped in the other direction where like the need for security was not as strong as my need to get out or
Mm-hmm.
to find a
Yeah.
place where I felt more aligned in the work that I was doing. That's
Mm-hmm.
when I really felt like okay, it this is costing too much at a personal level or professional level that it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
feel good anymore and I need to leave and figure out a way into a more aligned thing. So those are some of the personal factors. Some of the organizational factors, the number one determinant of burnout in organizations is an unsupportive boss or
Mm-hmm.
a bad boss, as we
Yeah.
like in quotation marks. Sorry, I'm trying to like figure out where to sound
No,
this.
you're good. You're good. You're good.
Yeah, so like if the boss is like bad or a toxic or whatever
Mm-hmm.
way
Mm-hmm.
we describe bad bosses, if we don't feel like we're supported by our boss, then that could be one of the biggest determinants of how teams thrive or burn out. And
Mm-hmm.
so this is one of the big things that we're addressing with my organization, with my company members, is how do we get bosses to realize that like
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
team depends on how well they manage their teams and also realizing the pressures that bosses have. So middle managers are the most stressed out people in any
Yes.
organization
Yes.
because they
Yes.
have top and bottom pressure, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so they need to also feel supported in order to then manage a team into well-being. And so that's one of the organizational things that is a huge determinant of whether or not
Yeah.
teams burn out.
I want to take a moment and kind of, you know, take in what you just said because you talked about personal, some of the factors, and when you touched on beliefs, I think that that resonates with me because working in corporate America for now 18 years, um, you kind of have this feeling that you have to live up to a certain standard
Hmm.
and you have to put in, if not just as put in the same amount effort as everyone else, if not more, you know, to make sure you keep your your stay, right?
Hmm.
And the pressure of, performance, the pressure of, you know, not being connected to the mission and the goal, right? Where the incentives are just they don't reflect who I am, or that doesn't incentivize me, you know, to do XYZ. So that definitely reflects or resonates with me. But one thing that you said had me think about is once we get to the stage of burnout, it's almost like we're in the cold red. Like
Mhm, mhm,
it is now almost like a fight or flight,
mhm, mhm.
stage. Is there is there a, from your studies and research, is there something like a gradual build up
Yeah,
to burnout? Okay.
yeah. I love that you asked this question. Let me just. I'm gonna pull something up so I don't mess it
Yeah.
up.
No, no, take your time. We love it. We love it.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of studies on burnout at the occupational level, at the
Mhm.
workplace level. And there's one incredible researcher in New Zealand called Nick Petrie
Mhm.
who describes it in a way that we have been using actually in our organization because it's really nicely and easily laid out. So he
Yeah.
talks about the 3 degrees of burnout. So the first degree burn is like where you have like heavy periods of stress. We feel overwhelmed, but we continue to work pretty effectively. So
Mhm.
I almost think of it as like a traffic light system. So if so
Mhm.
you're kind of still at the green light,
Yeah.
and it might just be like a short period of heavy stress, and most of us can function in that period. Our bodies
Mhm.
are stress is not a bad thing. Technically, stress is actually pretty normal for our survival, and
Mhm.
it's a necessary. All of us are equipped physiologically
Mhm.
to manage stress. Like we have the fight or flight response, like you mentioned,
Yeah.
have certain hormones that increase during periods of stress to help us manage stress, like cortisol,
Mhm.
adrenaline. And most of us in short periods of stress actually do pretty well. We can
Yeah.
actually perform really well and get focused and like do the work well. And so that's like the first degree burn. It's like just a heavy period of stress, feeling a bit overwhelmed, but we are still continuing to work effectively. The
Mhm.
second degree burn is like a full experience of, it's chronic stress.
Mm.
So, okay, now the short period of stress has turned into a longer period of stress, and now it's feeling like we're stressed all the time. We
Yeah.
feel fatigued and tired, and we have like our motivation starts to be affected. So, our motivation goes down, we become less effective at work, and just in general, we have a hard
Mhm.
time focusing and we're moving into survival mode.
Yeah.
And then the third degree burn, that's like kind of so if you think about first degree is green light, amber
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
second degree, and then now we're going to the red zone, like you mentioned. So that's the third degree burn, and that's like a full experience of burnout. Our
Mhm.
mind and body start to shut down. We're unable to do very simple tasks, and our emotions become harder to control and more unpredictable. So um, and I definitely experience all 3 levels, and I
Yeah.
think most of us
Yeah.
have different points in our lives. But it can be a very gradual and like subtle movement from one degree to the next. And obviously, the earlier you intervene and that you recognize that there's a problem, the better the outcomes in terms of like, okay, we can pull you out of the first degree much easier than we can pull you out of the third degree.
Mhm.
And it requires like more work to go from third degree to like no burnout
Yeah. Yeah.
rather than first degree to no burnout.
Mhm.
And but it requires a lot of awareness. And then from my experience, both personally and with clients, it's once we get to third degree, we go into survival, like into the fight or flight, where our
Yeah.
capacity is so narrow that we only see things in binary, you know?
Mm. Mhm.
And that's never a good thing when we're making big decisions, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
when
Yeah.
we're having to make important decisions and we only see like fight or flight, or like or it's usually like we give in to whatever people are saying or we exit,
Mm.
and it's just like that becomes a problem in of itself, because our ability to see a wider range of options becomes so limited because our capacity is so low and we cannot see options available to us. And so a lot of the work we do is trying to rebuild that capacity within ourselves or within
Mhm.
people so that they're able to see more than just like two options. And you can probably think of multiple examples either within your own experience or from having witnessed people who are stressed out around you when they only are like it's this or that, and you're like, are you sure those are your only
Mhm.
two options? But that's all they can see because their capacity to make good decisions or their capacity to see more options available to them are limited, and not by
Mhm.
any fault of their own. They're just
Yeah.
super stressed.
Yeah. Yeah. They to your point, they are truly in that survival mode.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, one thing, wow, this is really good. Um, one thing that you mentioned that had me thinking. So two questions. The first one is when we're dealing with burnout, and I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought, but it will come back.
It's
So
okay.
let me go to my second question. I know I'll pick up the first one I had. Is there an age when like individuals are starting to experience these degrees of burnout? Because I hear often, and when I say, on the news, they, mention, kids and, kids today, having a list of activities, that we go from here, we go there. And what we may not realize, or what research, early research and are now starting to show, that kids are, showing that they are being burnt out or going through experiences of burnout because of just the exhaustion of one thing after the next, after the next, after the next. I'm not living up to my mom and dad, standards of being a wonderful player, athlete, whatever the case may be. I'm playing, instruments. Is there a from your research, is there anything around when this starts? Or how
Hmm.
early do we start experiencing these degrees of burnout?
You're bringing up such an important and relevant question
Mhm,
about kids these days versus like maybe when you and I were kids.
mhm.
Um, the this stimulation that kids have these days from having smartphones or iPads
Yeah,
or TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram and
the list
Facebook,
goes on and on.
it's just like they're getting information at a rate way higher than I've ever experienced as a child.
Mhm, mhm.
Because, I when I was in primary school and when I was in school, like the internet kind of became a thing when I was in high school.
Yeah, same here,
Um,
same here.
And so, like, I was doing research from an encyclopedia that was published probably 20 years before. Like, the information was a little bit outdated, most likely,
Mhm, mhm.
because they only I honestly, I don't know the facts. I'm making numbers up here, 20 years, but I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
think like, encyclopedias, I don't think were, updated every year. Maybe they were, but, like, information was not as up to date as it is now,
Mhm.
and I didn't have access to all the information all at once at my fingertips, when
Yeah.
I was a kid, but kids these days do. And so they're constantly, I actually heard this on a podcast,
Mhm,
I think just 2 days ago when I was out for a walk, and they
mhm.
were talking about how in one day's worth of, in a day's worth, we now get more, like, just as much information in one day as people used to get in their whole lifetime,
Stop.
and I haven't fact checked or anything, but it's just like there's
It's
so
it's
much.
believable,
It is believable, right? Like,
you know?
there's just so much stimulation. Like, you walk down the street, you're on your phone, you're on the subway,
Mhm,
you're, like, checking the news, you're checking Instagram, you're checking
mhm.
TikTok, and, like, no one got that much information at once
Yeah,
every day, and, it's stimulation overload. And
yeah.
so I think, like, looking I'm good. I have 16 nieces and nephews, and
Mhm,
they range from 5 months to 18 years.
mhm.
And when I look at them and, like, see how much of the world they are connected to compared to what I was connected to when I was their age,
Mhm.
Just like they know so much more than I did
Yeah.
at their age because they just have way more exposure. Like they just
Mhm.
know a lot of world events that I didn't know about unless like I overheard the news while my parents were watching it,
Yeah.
and they just are so in tune and I don't know, just constantly connected to
Mhm.
everything. And so some of it is positive, like it's really I think they're way smarter than I was at their age.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
at the same time, I think it's overwhelming because I'm like, it was kind of nice not to know what was happening in the world, like
Yeah.
as a kid, because it's a big worry.
Yeah.
And so like now they're worried about climate change and war and things that kids shouldn't worry about, you know?
Uh-huh.
And I am from my personal experience, like my nieces and nephews do ask me quite a bit about burnout and okay, how do
Mhm.
you manage stress? We love your work. Tell us more. And then like I'm constantly talking to them about it. And it's kind of nice to be able to share that with them. Um, but at the same time, I'm like, I wish you didn't have to worry about this, you know,
Yeah.
at your age because it's too soon in my
Yeah.
mind.
It has definitely increased the level of anxiety.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's it. That's the exact feeling. Is like there's
Mhm.
so much there's heightened anxiety in kids now than there was maybe in our age. Like
Mhm.
there's the normal pressures of just being a teenager or
Yeah.
kid in school and wanting to fit in and wanting to have friends and not being bullied.
Mhm.
So that all existed for us too, but now it's like that and all the world pressures and like problems on their shoulders too.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I think that there's like just really heightened anxiety now,
Mhm.
and I'm noticing that with kids more so now than maybe when I was a kid. But
Yeah.
it's hard to know because I think the older we get, we kind of forget what our childhood was like too.
Exactly. Because it's such a short period.
Yeah, but um yeah, I think it's just like even noticing from my young or one of my younger nieces, she's
Mhm.
6 years old. And in kindergarten, she used to be doing like they used to do yoga and meditation, you know? And I think just the fact that these things exist in schools now, it like is the sign that
Yeah.
there is an increasing mental health problem within schools
Exactly.
that schools are trying to address at a younger
Mhm.
age because I didn't
Yeah.
have that growing up. Um,
Mhm.
but I don't know, I don't actually have a fact for like the specific age when things start. But what I
Mhm.
do know from the research is that one thing that becomes very evident from our work is that the things that used to work, like our stress coping mechanisms that used
Mhm.
to work to manage our stress in our 20s, we continue to do them in our 30s and 40s, thinking that they're going to work and they
Mm.
stop working.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so things that, like, there's a lot of things like that I can think of in undergrad that I did
Okay.
like pulling all-nighters
Mhm.
or doing things like to cope with my stress that were maybe worked at the time and they were fine.
Mhm.
But like trying to do them now in my 30s or like late 30s, it's not gonna like I'm not gonna have the same level of success. And actually, it's more exhausting for me to try
Mhm.
and cope in the same way than it is to just find a new, better way that fits
Get
my
away.
life now.
Mhm.
So that's one of the biggest failures we see, or like I don't mean failure in a
Mhm.
stigmatized way or anything,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's one of the biggest
Pitfalls. Yeah.
yeah, like pitfalls we see
Mhm.
in people trying to manage their stress is they'll try and do what they were doing 20 years ago thinking that's still going to work today.
Mhm.
So that's like one thing that we're noticing. And burnout tends to we're seeing a lot of there is higher rates of burnout amongst Gen Z and
Mhm.
like higher rates of anxiety amongst them than
Mhm.
other generations before them. But most people do burnout in their 30s and 40s. And I think that's
Yeah.
probably like their coping mechanisms are exhausted that they used for many years. And people start to question their sense of purpose and their alignment with their work at
Yes.
that time
Yes.
because our goals change over time. We go from wanting to like be successful and make money and secure ourselves to being like, oh, what is my sense of purpose? How can I make impact in the
It
world? And
evolves.
things
It
feel
evolves. Wow, Dr. Hiba, you are hitting on some great things. Um, one thing that you mentioned as I was just kind of just sitting and just digesting what you were saying is our coping mechanisms no longer work. What we did in the 20s and 30s, and I think that is worth underlining again because to your point, and this was like to my first question that I lost my train of thought, but I knew it was gonna come back, is to what you said around there is aspects of stress that is healthy, you know.
Mhm.
We're able to release these hormones that helps us to manage it, right? And it had me think about in that green stage of that first degree stress. One thing that, and this is just my personal thoughts, one thing that I have really tried to manage is this level of tension between ambition
Mm,
and contentment.
yeah.
And is to your point of my passion has evolved. Because I don't even know this is even a phrase, but I kind of coined this phrase as passion fatigue.
Hmm, hmm.
You know, to where like I come to a place in my life where what I'm doing is no longer feeding my my purpose or my passion, you
Right.
know? And it's because I'm going through a period of where my passion is evolving,
Mhm.
to where I have to now get to know and allow this passion to evolve, you know, um, where this is inner stranger, so to speak. And like I say all that to say, is there a real thing? And I'm and bear with me as I articulate this question, as I go back to that tension between the ambition and the contentment. Because even as a young child, I was thrown into things that I look back now that, oh, I'm so glad my mom and dad pushed me to do that activity. Even though I was scared to death, I'm so glad they pushed me to do that. I'm so glad this teacher pushed me to do this assignment, this project, even though I didn't feel like I was qualified, all this yada yada yada. But it helped me so much in the long run, right?
Mhm.
And even certain things myself to where I have put myself in maybe uncomfortable positions, but it was so beneficial to me when I think about it, what the returns from that uh, incident did. So when you think about that tension between ambition and contentment, where does burnout fit between that? Or how do we manage? How do we toggle between those two without overextending ourselves into the red?
Yeah, yeah. It's such a great question. And that is the whole basis of our company,
Yeah.
because I felt like when I burnt out as a doctor, I
Hmm.
felt like the option was you can only be ambitious and burnout as your option, or you can like be well and be bored, or like be well and not have ambition. Like you
Mm.
have to choose between well-being and ambition. And
Hmm.
I refuse to believe that. Like I refuse to let that be
Yeah.
the only two options available, right? And again,
Hmm.
maybe that came to me, maybe I only thought of it that way because I also didn't have the capacity to see beyond those two options,
Yeah.
you know?
Hmm.
And you're right, there is such a thing as passion fatigue or
Hmm.
passion burnout. And there's
Yeah.
people at MIT and HBS at Harvard Business School who are studying that at length.
Mm.
Um, where people actually burn out doing things they are super passionate about,
Yeah.
because they get the surge of inspiration, surge of motivation, and then what they don't do is like recover the next day. So a lot of the philosophy that we do with our work is kind of like, we if you imagine an elite athlete, like they're the top of their game, they're the top performers in their field, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever sport they're doing, they're going to be performing. Elite athletes are elite for a reason, right? Because they
Yeah.
perform at the top of their game.
Mm-hmm.
And what they also prioritize is recovery. In order to perform at your best, you also have to recover real hard. And in terms of burnout, there's three types of recovery that we can do. So there's like passive recovery. Let's start there. Passive recovery. We all know what that's like. We just sit on the couch, watch a Netflix show or a movie.
Mm-hmm.
We're not exerting a lot of energy. We might like read a book, we might have a nap. Those are like passive ways to recover, and our body needs passive recovery, right? Like we need to kind of like allow our bodies to just relax and shut down a little bit so that
Mm-hmm.
we can recover. Then there's active recovery, and those are things like what brings you joy, and that might be like spending time with your kids, um, going out for dinner with your friends, or going skiing, or whatever it is that you like doing. It's
Yeah.
engaging in your hobbies, it's spending
Mm-hmm.
time with your loved ones, it's like actively recovering through things outside of work. And there's a study that shows that the top CEOs in companies who are not burning out, who work really hard and like perform really well and are not burning out at home, or like not burning out in general, are the ones that have like an alternate life kind of thing, or like
Mm-hmm.
other world. And
Yeah.
so this other world is usually like, they might be like an investment banker at a
Mm-hmm.
top bank in New York City, but then they're also like a ballroom dancer.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
those two things don't really like, we don't associate them
Two ends of
together.
the spectrum. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but like the CEO is successful as a, or this investment banker is successful in his work because he's also
Mm-hmm.
going and doing ballroom dancing,
Yeah.
because it's completely disconnected from his job or her
Mm-hmm.
job.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last type of recovery that's available to people is learning recovery. And that is like allowing ourselves to learn a new skill, whether it's like
Mm-hmm.
playing a new instrument, like learning how to play the guitar, or learning a new language. We're actively engaging ourselves in a learning process that
Mm-hmm.
contributes to our growth in some way, shape, or form. And
Mm-hmm.
all of us human beings love to evolve and grow. Like that's what we're here to do, right?
Yeah.
Like we want to feel like we're growing, we're expanding, we're evolving, and that type of recovery is also really important. So people who invest in those three types of recovery tend to do better at work. They're more productive at work and like have their passion. The other thing I want to say, like, is we spend a lot of time at work, but our passion doesn't have to come from there. Some
Mm-hmm.
people don't have that as an option, like logistically in the short term at least, or for some time. That like some people do need to make ends meet, need to put a roof over their heads, make sure
Mm-hmm.
there's food on the table. And so like pursuing a passion job might be not accessible to them in that moment, but there are other ways that we can connect to our passion through other things. And I think that's one of the most protective mechanisms against burnout, is connecting to our sense of joy, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
we have this exercise that we do with all of our clients where we get them to really think about, where does, like, each of us has an authentic sense of joy. Like you and
Yeah.
I, Jonathan, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure we have some things that we both enjoy doing, but we each have things that the other probably doesn't enjoy doing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
we identify with our clients, what are your specific, authentic sources of joy, and how often are you connecting with them? And so if they're not, and most people when they're burnt out, they completely drop all of their luxurious like activities that bring them joy because they don't have time, or we've heard every excuse under the sun. We don't have time for this. And actually you have to make time because that's going to protect you against burnout.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that we are like really delivering on, is like, how do we maintain our sense of ambition? Because as human beings, we all have some sort of ambition. We want to make some sort of impact on the world, and also not like keep our sense of fulfillment and happiness um, alive, because we're not here just to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're here to
Mm-hmm.
really live our lives and thrive and not just survive. And so, like, it's finding that balance. I don't, it should never be a choice. And it is sometimes when we're so stressed, but it should never be a choice between choosing my ambition versus choosing my well-being. And it's
Yeah.
like, you can absolutely have both. You just sometimes need the right support to guide you there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That is, it's so awesome. I never thought about it. Well, of course, I never thought, because I never researched it into this way. But to your point, those types of recovery, the passive, the active, the learning. And when I think about those that I have had the pleasure to work with, and even leaders that I have admired, they always had that alter, you know, I won't say ego, but just that alter personality that was totally different from their job, whether it was, woodmanship, you work in investments, but yet you do woodmanship, or you do painting, all those different things. To your point, do the things that bring you joy. I say that very often, because I believe, as you can see, in soul care, and to me, soul care is doing the things that bring you joy. It's honoring your worth, and really taking care, or bringing more attention to yourself and what you deserve. And
Mhm,
we all deserve experiencing joy. So
mhm,
I really, really like what you said about that, as well as certain things that you have talked about around how we manage, you know, our burnout, how we manage these different degrees. So you talked about recovery, talked about, what we can do around coping, around doing the things that bring us joy. Are there anything else, or are there other things that we can do? And maybe let's first, since we have so many people in our audience that either are entrepreneurs, or leaders, or kind of work in corporate America. Like, what are certain things we can do on the work side when we think about that occupational aspect, and then what certain things we can do, I guess, to prevent things from bleeding over to your personal life?
mhm, mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like entrepreneurship is its own special thing, and I can speak to
It
that
is.
from my own experience in the last year and a bit. But it's um, okay. So I think one of the biggest things that everyone like needs to um, really come up with, or like really become aware of, is like, what are
Mhm,
the things that are really important to you, in terms of like, what are the things that keep you grounded?
mhm.
This is for any person at
Yeah,
any
yeah,
level of
yeah,
stress.
yeah.
What are the things that keep you grounded, and how can they become part of your non-negotiable routine? So, um, we do this thing again where this is like in the first meeting with clients that we have with them, is we identify what are your grounding techniques and who are your people. And we
Mhm,
do this in three ways. Like, we think about it from grounding from a people's perspective, practices and places.
mhm.
So if you think about your people, it's like, who are your confidants? Who are people who are going to love you no matter what? Who don't
Yeah.
care about your status, who don't care about your job title, who don't care about how much money you make, who don't care about what deliverables you're going to give them at the end of each day, who just really care about you and just you as a person, and who are going to love you and hold you no matter what.
Mhm,
And most of us like have people, whether it's our partners, our families, our best friend, like.
Mhm.
Those are the people who, no matter what, if you fail, if you succeed, if you fall on your face, will like
Mhm.
be there for you and love you and support you no matter what. So we help people identify like at least one person that they, if they're in trouble, they can easily pick up the phone and just call them, and they would never think twice about it, you know? And so um that's a protective mechanism against like that's a help that helps ground us, right? Having
Mhm.
someone have our back. Then the second thing we say is like, what are your practices? For everyone, that's different. For me, my grounding practice that's non-negotiable is meditation. I meditate twice a day. I exercise. I eat healthy. Like I like to surf. I absolutely love to surf. I read. I write. So
Mhm.
like one of my other worlds is like writing. I'm a writer also. I'm writing a lot of books. I get in the zone and I'm just like in another I can sit there for when the mood strikes. I can sit there
Yeah.
for 7 hours straight and just like write a whole book, you know?
Mm.
And it's like for me, it's just like being in a state of flow, of creativity, of
Mhm.
allowing the story to come through me, like
Yeah.
that brings me a lot of groundedness and joy. And I get all the emotions through me. Like sometimes I'm crying as I'm writing, and it's just like this very transformative experience. So I've
Mhm.
made it into a practice that I do regularly, because it started out as kind of just like it just happened one day. I just like was washing my dishes in my apartment, and then I went to my computer, wrote a bunch of pages, a whole chapter of a book, and I'm like, whoa, what was that? I'm like, I don't care what that was. That was so fun. It brought me so much joy. I felt so free, so creative, so flowy. And so then over the last like 6 months at least, I've been doing that consistently every day,
Mhm.
because I know it grounds me. And I'm an entrepreneur who's has a business venture that's just over a year old. So as you know, like entrepreneurs have a lot of um, it's a high risk
Mhm.
venture where you're taking a lot of risks. You don't know if you're going to succeed or fail. You have a vision that's like you're strongly holding on to, and it's rewarding in a lot of ways and challenging. And then it requires you to grow personally and professionally in a very quick amount of time,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you're constantly facing new fears, new triggers that
Mhm.
you didn't even know existed. Um, and then having to manage all of that as you're like
Mhm.
evolving into the person that you are as you build your business. So for me, it's become like at first I was also guilty of saying like I don't have time to write. I got to build my business. And then I'm like, "Oh, it's so necessary that I sit down and write so I can
Mhm.
build my business." Um and then the last thing is places. So what are the places that feel grounding to you? So it might be like your local park. It might
Mhm.
be for me here in New York, I love walking over the bridges. So
Mhm.
I did a walk across the bridge this morning, just there, like to Manhattan and back.
Mhm.
And for me, that's like it's why it's kind of funny, because the bridges are chaotic. There's subways going through, there's cars, there's a ton of people, there's bikes, and there's a lot of like stimulation on the bridge. But for some reason, for me, in particular, I find a lot of peace there.
Mhm.
So, like, just walking across the bridge, and I think it's like part of it is metaphorical too. It's just like connecting people, connecting places, connecting, making a connection.
Mhm.
Um, that feels really, really grounding for me. So I know that if I'm feeling stressed, I'll just go take myself for a walk across the bridge. Or
Mhm.
just like for me, another thing is just being out in nature. But there are specific places sometimes, like I'll try and identify places close to me in my town or my city that are gonna be grounding for me no matter what. So when I used to live in Boston, I had a bench in the park that I used to go sit and either people watch, read, or journal.
Mhm.
But it was a very specific bench, and sometimes if someone was sitting on it, I'd go to the bench next door and just like look at the other people who sat on my bench.
Mhm.
But but yeah, it's just like identifying the people, places, or things that keep you grounded, and then identifying how often am I connecting with these things. And
Mhm.
so that's like just for anybody. In terms of
Yeah.
um, what entrepreneurs can do, especially because there's like maybe bigger risks and higher
Mhm.
periods of uncertainty,
Mhm.
I would say one protective thing you can do for yourself to protect yourself from burnout is really hold the vision. Like, hold the vision of like, why did I start this venture? Why is this important to me? Clearly, this is a problem that I care about solving, and I think I have the skill set and the know how and the passion to solve this particular problem.
Yeah.
Hold that vision, like really, really, really get down to like, why am I doing this?
Mhm.
Because there will be days when you're going to start looking at other jobs, when you're going to start considering going back to corporate, when you're going
Mhm.
to consider quitting. And but it's really important to stay the course. Like,
Mhm.
just know, like, very clearly, like, what is my exit plan? Like, what is my threshold at the beginning when you're feeling well, and have someone else hold the vision with you,
Mhm.
because there will be multiple times of doubt, of self doubt, of whether the venture is going to work, whether it's not going to work. But if you have a vision holder alongside you that reminds you why you're in this, it can be super helpful and protective to you as you try and make a difference in the world in whatever way that looks like for you. And then the other thing that your last question was about, like, what can corporations do or organizations do?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I had this really wonderful conversation with an executive director of a bank on the weekend,
Mhm.
and he said something to me that is actually even proven in the research and from our experience. But it was lovely to hear from a personal perspective and a story that he shared um, from his team. So he was like, I undervalued how, or like, he's like, there's so much value in being so specific about recognizing people in a public way. So he was like, for me to be, he's like, I started doing this recently where I'm recognizing people's efforts publicly in team meetings. Well, where I'll say, like, hey, this person did this, this, and this. And that is not just like great job. Like, great job, it was actually kind of patronizing in some ways, because you're like, okay, great job. Why though? Like, or how can I improve? Like, that was a
Mhm.
question I often asked my attendings when I was a resident, is like, I'd ask for feedback and be like, you did great. And I'm like, that's so non-specific. Like, I don't know what I did great or how I can do
Mhm.
better, because I'm learning. I'm in a position of learning right now, and I'm
Yes.
learning how to do this job. And I don't know how to improve if you're just telling me I'm doing great.
Mhm.
Or like, you could do it better, but like, tell me specifically how.
Mhm.
So, what I loved about his comment is that when you recognize people publicly, it does two things. First of all, it makes people feel valued. And then, second of all, it makes them realize you're paying attention to the work that they're doing, and that the work that they're doing matters.
Mhm.
You know, like, my boss is actually like, my work isn't just, I'm not just doing it and no one's noticing. It's like, it's being recognized, and it's actually being publicly recognized, which is like giving me validation and making me feel valued. And that doesn't cost money. You know,
Yeah.
it doesn't cost anyone
Yeah.
money. But
Yeah.
like, not feeling valued or recognized at work is a huge thing. And then the other thing I would recommend for organizations, and these are just general
Mhm.
recommendations. Obviously, when we do our consulting work, it's a lot more specific because we do a big diagnostic process to understand what's happening within the organization. And we partner with people so that they, like, we know they're the experts in their own field.
Mhm.
We don't try and come up with solutions for them without really truly understanding, like, how they work, how their organizations work. They know that better than we do. But generally speaking, another thing that is protective is creating a team culture where people are friends. And um, organizations tend to keep their employees, or like, there's lower rates of attrition within organization when people have friends on their team.
Yeah.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So it's like,
Yeah.
um how can you foster moments, or um how can you build connections at work
Mhm.
through team building, or whatever, in whatever
Mhm.
way, like, or just on a day to day where people actually like each other and like want to be there together,
Mhm.
because we're spending so much time with our coworkers that it ends up being um a place that it's nice to like where you are when you're at work,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Dr. Hiba, one last question, and definitely want you to provide how people can get in contact with you, and different things that you are currently doing. But for someone that may be listening to this and is going through a period of those degrees of burnout, um, if you would be so kind to speak to them and just take a moment to encourage them. Again, for someone that maybe listening to this and experiencing some burnout, like what would you tell them? What would you say to them?
Oof, I see you, I feel you. And it is so hard. It is so hard. Um, it can feel exhausting. It can feel extremely tiring. And just give yourself a break. Like, really cut yourself some slack. If you can, be as compassionate as you can to yourself, because
Mm,
what ends up happening usually is we tend to be harder on ourselves when we're feeling, and more judgmental about, like, I'm not being able, I can't do what I used to be able to do, or I'm feeling like, what's going on with me? I'm failing, I'm
mhm,
failing, I'm failing. And actually,
mhm,
um, I would say, and this is the thing I say to a lot of my clients, is like, talk to yourself in those moments as if you were talking to a 5-year-old child.
mhm,
If a 5-year-old child comes to you and says, like, I'm exhausted, you wouldn't tear them down. You wouldn't say to them, like, oh, you're such a failure, or you're not coping, or you just be like, okay, take a break,
yeah,
take a nap.
yeah, yeah.
Let's do something, like, just be extremely compassionate and loving with yourself in the way that you would a 5-year-old child, because that's what you deserve at the end of the day. Like, you do not deserve to be, you don't deserve to beat yourself up for something that
Mhm,
is a totally normal part of life. And that happens to almost everybody,
mhm,
And the other thing I would say is, it's not permanent. It is never permanent. Like, all of our emotions, all of our feelings, all of our states of mind, all of our states of life and stages of life are transient. We can never feel happy all the time. We can never feel sad all the time. We can never feel stressed all the time. Things come in waves and, like, kind of transit through us. So just remember that if you're going through it now, you're likely going to come out of it.
mhm,
And I do encourage absolutely everybody to talk to someone, whether it's your friends, your family, ask for help, get professional help. But you do not need to do this alone. And actually, recovery is much, much quicker and much more effective when you're doing it with someone by your side. So, um, be compassionate to yourself. Um, what was the second thing I said? No. Realize that it's just a transient thing, and
yeah,
then get help.
yeah.
Really, really get the support that you need.
Thank you for that. How can people get in contact with you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Hiba Khaled, on LinkedIn. Feel free to find me there. I'm the co-founder of Embers. And then you'll find me, I think my tagline is like eliminating burnout. I think I'm the
Mm,
only one with that name and title. And then you can also find me on Instagram at I am Hiba Khaled. And I'll send you all these links too, just so you can
yeah,
post
we'll
them.
have them all in the show notes, family.
Yeah.
Uh,
And then
Dr.
our,
Hip, go ahead.
our website is emberscc.com. And I also started a Substack a month ago now, called Feel It to Heal It. It's
Okay.
more personal, and it's more about my personal journey with burnout and
Hmm.
just kind of other things. Just my path to freedom, I would say.
And
Um,
it was called a Substack. What was that?
Substack, yeah, it's like a blog, but on Substack.
Okay. Okay.
Um, and it's called Feel It to Heal It. So that's a little
Okay.
bit more storytelling, more personal. So feel free to follow along and subscribe, and I'll share stories there. I love storytelling.
Yes, we will have all those links in the show notes. So definitely, family, please go check that out. You have given us so many gems, from the different types of recovery to, you said, of anyone that is going through burnout, be compassionate to yourself. Take a break. Take a break. Get help. Don't do this alone. Sometimes we suffer so much in silo. And that is the biggest risk when we're going through and we're managing stress, and we're going through those phases of burnout. So I want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise. And family, just know, hey, you were created to be great. Just like Dr. Hiba said, be compassionate with yourself. Know that you are so worthy of this. Okay. So in all that you do, love God, love yourself, love your neighbor. I'm your favorite neighbor, Jay Murray. Till next time, be blessed.